Well, welcome everybody. I'm here with Jonathan Rogers. Jonathan is many things. Jonathan, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. You are, for the purposes of this discussion, an author and the founder of the Habit Writing Community. Jonathan, can you tell us what you do for a living and what is the Habit?
I've always known that I had a dual calling between teaching and writing. And for most of my life, it's been I either teach or I write. I kind of go back and forth. But here in the last, since 2018, I guess, as I've been running the Habit, I've figured out finally how to sort of do both of those things together, but also discover that my calling is really beyond that, and not just writing or teaching, but rather sort of I'm in the hospitality business, giving writers an opportunity to connect with one another, to feel connected to a larger conversation, give each other a little more courage. Yeah, I think of my job now as shepherding stories into the world, whether that's stories that I've written, stories that other people are writing. And beyond either teaching or editing, I'm finding that connecting writers with each other is really key to that work. And so I guess, even at this age, I'm still unfolding what my calling is. And you said, what's the Habit? The Habit's an umbrella. I don't know if I'm confusing things or being clever marketing by having all these things called the Habit. But on Tuesdays, I send out a letter to writers called the Habit Weekly. And on Mondays, I have a podcast. I'm part of the Rabbit Room Network called the Habit Conversation with Writers About Writing. And then the membership is I thought of the membership, the Habit membership, I thought of it as when I started doing it, a library of resources for writers, me teaching and doing all these things. And I figured a community would be sort of a byproduct of that. Now I'm kind of realizing that the community is the business. The community is what is valuable to writers. And the content, I don't like the word content creation, but I'll use it anyway. The content creation on my part is a way to gather people, but it's the gathering is what's really important.
I want to pick your brain more about community and the process of making art. But before we jump into that main topic, I'm going to throw a fun question at you. If you had to sum up your creative motto, what would it be?
Creative motto that I don't always manage to live up to is there's always more where that came from. So,
what does that mean?
Well, it means, another way of saying the same thing is creativity is a river rather than a reservoir. And so you think you've got this finite number of ideas, and that if you aren't careful, you're going to run out of ideas. When it's truer that as you express ideas, as you play out images and scenes or whatever, the act of doing that creates more insight, images, ideas. And so they keep flowing as you let them flow. I remember working for a while there, I worked for an ad agency, and I would have to come up with 3 ideas for a bank brochure. And it's like, I don't even have one idea for a bank brochure. I can have 3. And then I would just sit there until I got 3 ideas. I'd send them off. And then I'd think, okay, I can't believe I had 3 ideas. And then I'd hear back from the bank, and they'd say, we don't like any of these ideas. Give us more. And then there were more ideas. And I'm glad that phase of my life is over, but I learned so much about the nature of ideas. There's always more.
There's always more where that came from. I want to talk to you today about basically community and art. You just described yourself as being in the hospitality business. That is a very collective, people-centered approach to teaching. You said shepherding art into the world. When we think of creativity, when I think of creativity, I often have to contend with this idea that great creative production comes from great creative individuals, not creative groups, not a creative support network. And I think there's so many ways that my imagination has been influenced, has been hacked by the culture. Because when I picture creative people, they're always alone, and they're always feverishly writing out this thing or solving this equation. But you have built a community around writing, helping writers bring things into the world. Can you speak to that a little bit? Why do we need others when making art?
Yeah. I mean, I think we need others when making art for the same reason we need others, period. We become more human as we connect with other people. The center of yourself is not in your rib cage. It's somehow related to, I'm not saying yourself has nothing to do with what's inside your rib cage, but I think the locus of the self is really in your connection to what's outside you. You don't really give yourself a name. Somebody told you were Andy. And I think we need other people to tell us. I want to be careful of the way to talk about this, but in some ways we need others to know who we are, not because, and I know sometimes people give others false names. That happens all the time. And yet, so that's a danger, but I also don't know how you can be yourself all by yourself. And so as somebody in The Habit recently remarked, as I interact with these other people, I sound more like myself. And I think that's literally true. As you are around smart people, you get smarter. Another one of the habitués, that's what we call habit members, wrote this beautiful essay called Other People's Loves, about the way that when she has a friend who loves pigs. It's never occurred to her to love pigs, but she kind of loves pigs because of this friend of hers. And I think that's a huge part of why it's so important to have other people. I had this same writer didn't know she was interested in metallurgy, except her husband's interested in metallurgy, and so now she is. And so there's this expansion of the self as we live with other people, and as we join with them in their loves and their interests, and as we spur them on and as they spur us on. I'm talking about art, but more to the point, I'm talking about just what it means to be a fully realized person. And there's no way to do that by yourself. And so as you get bigger, you've got more to say, more to write, more to draw pictures about or write songs about. That's a big part of it. I just think, we really, well, I remember one time I was struggling to write a biography of Flannery O'Connor. And it had been, I don't know, 20 months, something like that. And I was bowling with Andy Osinga. And he asked me what I was up to. I said, I'm struggling with this book about Flannery O'Connor. He said, tell me more about it. And I said, well, it's like for Christian people who think they know they're supposed to like Flannery O'Connor, but they just can't do it. They just can't like her, and they don't get her. And he said, well, that's me. That sounds like me. And so I went home and I started, every morning when I woke up, I said, what does Andy Osinga need to know about Flannery O'Connor today? And I was able to finish the book because I was thinking it was a gift to a person. Instead of going home and thinking about I could list by name, I don't know, 30 people who are more qualified to write a book about Flannery O'Connor than I was. And as long as I was living that way, the book didn't get written. But when I knew somebody who needed the book and somebody who was a friend, well, the book got written.
Then the words started to flow. Yeah.
What does Andy need to know is very different from what do I have to say that all these brilliant people who I don't even know, but I know their names, what do I have to say that they don't have to say? Those are very different questions.
It sounds like you're saying in some ways we don't even know what our words are, what our picture is, what our poem is, what our loves are, until we begin to share those things in a community, and then they come back to us, and share them again, and then they come back to us. It's a vision for not only creative production, but learning and growing, which is very different than I think the one that most people in the West get handed down to them. And
I know, I mean, there is such thing as people sort of lone geniuses. It's not that it never happens, but it's just not the norm. And I wouldn't want to, even if I had the ability to be a lone genius, I wouldn't want to do it. I'm neither a genius, but thankfully I'm not alone either. So it works out okay.
Yeah. Here's a question following on from that. There's many, you've pre-existed me in the Rabbit Room community by like more than a decade. So that entails community. There's circles of creative people around you, like that story with Andy Osinga illustrates, that you're in dialogue with and that you're sharing life with. And you've created the Habit community. So you're paying it forward. You're giving the gift of others to lots of people. Many people watching this or listening to this are still isolated in their creative work. Yeah. So what do you say to someone who longs for community but just hasn't found it yet?
Well, I guess I would say it's having community is more important than having creative community. And there are people who literally just live in places where there just aren't many people doing creative work. And yet I think so I want to start with, as I've been saying, we need to be connected to people to be more human. And that's where your art comes from, is your humanity. And so it's pretty important that you connect with whoever is interested in what they're interested in. The people who are really interested in what they're interested in. Let me reframe that. Connect with people who are fascinated by real things. Politics doesn't count. That's not a real thing. That's a thing about a thing. But I mean, who do you know who is a gardener, who's a machinist and loves being a machinist? And so that's not, and let me also point out, Andy, am blessed to be friends with a lot of people who do creative work. But you know what? When we get together, we're not usually talking about creative work, right? We're talking about what we're interested in. And so, what I love about creative people is they're interested in stuff. They're observant and they pay attention. But that's the reason they're valuable. That more than, I don't know, the fact that they could recommend an agent or a publicist or whatever. That is way down on the list of what's valuable about having creative people, creative friends. Who do you know who loves the world? I've got a geologist friend who I want to go get more interested in the world when I talk to that person. And he doesn't think of himself as especially creative. And yet, as a creative friendship, that's one of the most valuable ones I've got. So I think I'd like to reframe the idea of creative community in those terms. What you really need is people who are engaged in the world and make you more engaged. But I get it. You do want to be around people who don't think you're a lunatic for wanting to paint or write songs or write books. And I guess, I would just say it's so important to, instead of thinking in terms of I've got to find creative communities, might be up to you to make it, to invite people and to take that chance. One of my Habit members lives in a tiny town in Tennessee. You don't think of it as a creative hub. And she just said, you know what, I'm going to make some pies and I'm going to invite people over to come read your poems, come read your stories, show us your art. If you feel like you can't do any of that, just bring a pie. And I think she calls it poetry, prose, and pies or something like that.
I love that.
And suddenly there's this little community of people who are sharing their work with each other. And I would also say giving people opportunity to share their work that to provide an audience is really valuable. So in other words, it's not just creating a writer's group where you critique each other's work and help, it's really valuable to give people a place to share their work. And that's so inspiring to other people. And it also makes people feel a lot less lonely.
Yeah. There's so much power in an invitation. I can't join a thing, so I'm just going to say, come on over on Thursday night and I'll cook a pie. We'll read somebody else's work together. We'll read your work. I heard that in your response. And I also heard that there's power in attention, that listening, looking, entering into both the world together and into the worlds of one another's projects, thought, work. Yeah, that's so powerful.
Yeah, I love giving writers a chance to read their work to each other. Just yesterday, we're recording this the day after my Colorado workshop week. Presented by The Habit. We end these retreats, every one of the retreats I do, we end with a story night. And to have a writer present his or her story to people who kind of know what they've been through in creating that story, it is just magic. And it's just staggering to see how much beauty people are putting into the world. And to give them the opportunity to show that to each other really makes a difference in the way people think about their own work and possibilities for new work they might do. We've
been talking about The Habit, and we've been unfolding some of the high-level lessons and principles that you've experienced and learned working with The Habit. Let's zoom in. I think one of the things I'd like to achieve in this conversation is just laying out for people what The Habit is. Can you talk about the origin story? How did it begin? And then what are the practices? What do you do when you do what you do?
Okay.
Lay it all out for people.
Okay, I'll try. The origin story for The Habit I started teaching online writing classes. I don't know, 2015 maybe, somewhere along in there. As I remember, the first time I taught an online class, I just needed to round up some money so I could take my family to the Grand Canyon. We'd never been on a big trip like that. And it was frankly mercenary. I didn't quite believe in online teaching. I was teaching, I was doing classroom teaching at a college at the time, but I just put this thing together and some people took it and it went well. And then after the class was over, one of the participants sent me an email. She said, I just got out of an abusive marriage where my husband took my voice completely away. And after this class, I feel like my voice is coming back. And I thought, maybe this is not a mercenary endeavor after all. I mean, no, actually, it was undeniably a mercenary endeavor. And then in the middle of the mercenary endeavor, I realized maybe this is closer to my calling than I thought. I love teaching creative writing to adults. I love college students too, but I think, as it turns out, I think my gifts lie a little more in the direction of adults, especially with people who are paying their own tuition, and who are desirous of hearing critique about their work and who want to hear how they can make it better. Students college students, they're required to take these things. And I had plenty of students who, never mind, I'm not going to, I had plenty of wonderful college students, but it feels like for my gifts, it made a lot more sense to, the more I taught adults, the more it made sense. And then, so I taught those classes for a while and then started hearing about this model of sort of, you create a library of classes and then people join as members to have access to it. And as I think I alluded to this a minute ago, I knew there would be community. I mean, I knew people would connect over that. And I thought that could be a nice byproduct. And so we have a forum where people can discuss whatever they want to. And as the years have gone by, I've just realized that forum, that opportunity for people to ask each other's questions and spur each other on to love and good deeds and encourage one another. I think people maybe came for the content and then stayed for the community. And it's just been amazing to see the generosity with which people encourage one another and the generosity with which they give each other critique. And yet they do it in a way. I had somebody the other day tell me that she's in a critique group in her hometown, and she comes home crying from that critique group pretty often for what they've said about her work. And she says, and then I get the same feedback from the people in the Habit, and I feel energized, and I feel like I'm ready to go implement that.
Yeah. Because
there's just an atmosphere there. It's of a sense that we're not trying to establish our place on a pecking order. And it's been incredible how productive that is. I know there is a kind of value in a somewhat adversarial. I mean, people challenge each other to get better. I mean, Michael Jordan got where he got not by getting serious about his place on the pecking order. And yet that's not the only way to achieve excellence. And it's not a way that I'm especially interested in. And so that interaction between people, as people help each other to be more of who they are and are able to say, I'm really glad you're tending that patch of ground. I've got my patch of ground here, but there's no way for us to decide who's superior because you're doing your thing and I'm doing my thing. And I love the way this self over here is selving and I'm going to self this way. And amazing things happen when people have that attitude. When there's not a zero-sum game, when there's not a scarcity mindset, but rather an abundance. I think you're familiar with Lewis Hyde's book, The Gift. Mm-hmm. He talks about the market economy and the gift economy. It's so tempting to think of, and the market economy is great for certain things. It's great for making sure shoes get produced and that I can buy shoes for a reasonable price and it's fair and all that kind of stuff. And yet, and certainly there is an aspect of the market economy in art making, but art making really lives in the gift economy. And the biggest insight from that book for me is that when it comes to tangible goods, when I give away a tangible good, I have fewer tangible goods than I had. I mean, just by definition. If I have 2 pairs of shoes and I share with you, I've only got 1 pair of shoes now. But when it comes to intangible goods, which by the way are what make life worth living, when I give intangible goods away, I've got more. So if I have peace and I spread peace, I don't have less peace. And that's where art lives. And there's not a finite amount of glory to be shared when it comes to art making. It doesn't, when you make something beautiful, Andy, that doesn't take anything away from me, unless I've got some sort of false mindset that's really easy to fall into.
Yeah.
And I think the gift of the Habit, and I do spend some time trying to remind people of this, there's not a finite amount of glory available to us. Mm. You're adding to the good in the world when you make good things, and that doesn't hurt anybody. It doesn't take anything away from anybody. And when it's really tempting to get in that sort of that hierarchical mindset instead of thinking, I've got a patch of ground, you've got a patch of ground. As a matter of fact, when my patch of ground gets better, there's more bees to pollinate your. I don't know. I'm getting at it. I'm not going to spin that extended metaphor out any further.
Like you said, you're in the hospitality business, which is about giving. It's a welcoming mindset. It's not a scarcity mindset.
Yeah. And the amazing thing is that, it's principles that I believed that I knew to be true, and yet it still is risky. And I didn't really know that it was going to work. I didn't really know that I could, or I shouldn't say that we could create a space in which people don't start acting like idiots about politics. That they can actually, I'm quite sure members of the Habit are all over the political spectrum, and they're really kind to each other and really generous and are really helping each other become better versions of themselves.
Yeah.
Which results in better work.
I haven't been a member of the Habit, but in my work with the Rabbit Room for the past couple of years, I've crossed paths with a lot of Habit folks. The Venn diagrams there's a lot of overlap there.
Sure.
And the community is just marked by exactly what you're saying: generosity, cheerfulness, willingness. When I ask them for something, they're the first to give, whether it's feedback or, hey, can you read this? Or, hey, can I read this thing that you did? It's really something special.
Yeah. And I have to acknowledge a lot of that I learned that way of thinking from being mixed up with the Rabbit Room for so long. The Lost Tales of Sir Galahad book, Rabbit Room Press, collection of stories about, I started to say made up stories about Galahad. I think maybe a lot of the stories about Galahad are made up, but these are new stories about Galahad. And so Pete Peterson, Jennifer Trafton were editing that book, and they said, hey, we need about 2 more stories, 2 or 3, maybe 3. Do you think the writers of The Habit could help out? I said, sure. So I was put out a kind of an all call to the people of The Habit, and I said, hey, we've got, we need, Pete and Jennifer need 2 or 3 more stories. Why don't y'all write some and send them in, and we'll see if some of them get accepted. And so the next thing I know, they had done something that doesn't make sense in a market economy, in a scarcity mindset. They started posting their stories and saying, hey, could you give me feedback on this? And they were in direct competition, let's say, with each other.
Yeah.
There were 2 or 3 spots, and I don't know, 20 people started posting stories and then giving each other feedback. And if you help somebody's story get better, I'm sorry, if there's only 2 or 3 spots, that makes it less likely that yours is going to get accepted. And they did it anyway. And the stories got better. In the end, I want to say 12 or 13 of them got accepted. Pete and Jennifer said, you know what, we're just going to publish more stories. I know sometimes 2 or 3 slots really means 2 or 3 slots. I don't mean to suggest that it's loaves and fishes every time, but there was a little loaves and fishes action going there, where as people were generous to one another, everything got better and there was more space for everybody. And I love that story so much. And it's kind of you're asking for origins. That's not an origin story, but it is it's a story that says, here's why this group of writers is different.
Yeah. Yeah. And that book became such a special book. And when Pete Peterson, who's the publisher of Rabbit Room Press, talks about that book, he talks about the Habit community and what a wonderful thing that was to be swept into this outpouring of creativity because of the power of an invitation and a abundance mindset.
I'm happy to report that we are more and more pushing into the real world, not just the great majority of what we do is on the internet, that just is what it is. And, but, we're up to like, I don't know, 5 retreats a year now where people are actually, being with each other in person. And I think that's really going to be transformative.
Yeah. Tell us more about the retreats.
Well, we run 2 at Northwind Manor in February and June. We call it the Writers' Weekends. And that's not a working retreat. That's basically a gathering of bookish people who all just a love fest, of mostly Habit members. Sometimes if it doesn't fill up with Habit members, we invite other people to come. And, we do some writing exercises and, a critique group, and I record a Habit podcast episode. I do a little bit of teaching, but it's mostly just for people to connect with one another and the people who they've only known as a little square on a Zoom call, standing on the same patch of ground with them, in their bodies. Those are really, really special. And then I do something I call the Focus Retreat, where the idea is you just go to Scarrett Bennett Center here in Nashville, this beautiful Gothic campus. And it used to be, I guess, a women's college. And so there are dorms. And so everybody gets a dorm room with a desk, sort of monkish austerity. And they go in and they write in their room by themselves if they want to. The idea is you spend hours a day writing, but you also don't go crazy because you come to the dining hall and we eat together and we talk about how things are going, have entertainments in the evening, songwriters night and a story night. I always get this year, Kate Gaston is going to come talk to the groups. I think it's going to be incredible. And so we've got one coming up in October. That's the one Kate Gaston is coming to. So that's March and October. And then I just got back from workshop week. So we went to Colorado Springs, and that was 17 people who just brought work that they wanted to critique. And we just, 2 sessions a day. One person was on the hot seat for an hour and everybody else, talked about gave them feedback, and it was incredible. Just to see how generous people were, even when they're saying, "Hey, this didn't work for me," but the trust and the courage that people gave one another, the ability to not be discouraged, to here's why this didn't work, and then be energized by that instead of discouraged, was really amazing.
I remember
another great thing about that is the reminder that any 8 people is smarter than any one person. I had my feedback all listed out, that I'm the authority here. Andy. And I had my feedback. And then as I heard other people talk, I thought, oh, yeah, that's true. Thing I didn't, I'm pretty good at this, and I didn't see that. And that's exactly what that person needed to hear.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that you were here and not just me.
At Hutchmoot last year, you and I were talking in a hallway and having a good chat. And Micah Hawkinson walks up, and he was writing a novel and having trouble finishing it. And he came to your first Focus retreat,
Yeah,
and finished the draft there.
mm-hmm.
I just read the draft of that, and it's wonderful. It was just soaring and moving and lovely and gentle, and I completely enjoyed reading his story. In his acknowledgments, it's just a list of things that people in the Rabbit Room at Hutchmoot's past and things that people in the Habit community said to him at key moments that encouraged him to just keep going a little bit more, a little bit more.
I love it.
And now
I love acknowledgments.
What's that?
I love acknowledgments. And I always read the acknowledgments in books, especially now that I have, the habit and realize just how important people are to each other. And so there are a lot of works in the world now that I don't think would have gotten finished if people in the Habit extended universe didn't have each other.
Yeah. We're coming to the end of our time. So let me throw a last question at you. What's ahead for the Habit? What does the future hold for the community? And you can tie in any thoughts you have about the future of creative community in general in a changing world, and the digital age only throws more interesting tools and curveballs at us as we go along.
Yeah. There's two different mindsets two different shifts in mindset that I'm going through as I sort of lead that group of people. One is I've been finally, I don't know what took me so long, but finally recognizing that a big thing that these writers need in this world, our little world and other worlds too, is the need to give, to teach each other to what they're experts on, to be able to teach it. And so more and more, I've just been letting other people in the membership teach this class or lead this group. I've been trying to get away from it being the JR show, and if finally, I don't know why it took me this long to realize that all I have to do is say, would you like to lead this discussion of a movie? And of course, people would like to lead a discussion of a movie. And there's no reason for me to do that. And so more and more giving people opportunities to lead. And I'm not trying to do less of the things I've been doing. I'm still teaching one class per quarter, and I'm still doing office hours and that kind of stuff. But just expanding the offerings just by giving people an opportunity to do more of it themselves. And that has so far proven to be a great enrichment of what we do over there. And I've already alluded to the fact that I'm trying to get more serious about the in-person component. In one sense, I wish the Habit weren't necessary. I wish everybody could just be, if you're in Tullahoma, Tennessee, you just gather up your creative friends in Tullahoma and encourage one another. But, it's hard. And so I'm glad to be at the service of people who don't know where else to find creative community. But I also hope that they will more and more be connecting with flesh and blood people in their own lives and their own. I think holds, I don't know how many more retreats I can do. I may be maxed out on the number of retreats I can do, but I started experimenting this year with just writers cohorts, kind of much more intense 6-week writing experiences. And so I'm going to be doing more of that in the future. But that's kind of what the future holds. And when you mentioned technology, I think I have no gifts for foreseeing the future. But I do know that I'm not concerned about AI becoming sentient, taking on human consciousness, but I am concerned about humans ceding their consciousness to AI. And I think people who care about the human soul with regard to creativity, people who see creativity as a function of the human soul and not as a outgrowth of neuron something. I'm really seeing opportunities and understanding that we've got to figure out ways to talk about creativity in terms of what can you do that the robot can't do. And once you know that, the encouraging thing is there's a lot you can do that the robot can't do. And the robot, it's been helpful to see what the robot can do, and it's very impressive what the robot can do. But it also helps me see, then I don't need to do that. The robot has this power, this incredible power to average out lots of perspectives, but it can't have a perspective. Mm-hmm. And I have one, and you have one. And I think I've already been talking about making, community, whether it's online or in person, making us more human. And as we lean into what makes us more human, I think we're going to be able to keep doing the work we're doing without having to worry about the robot.
Yeah. Well, Jonathan, thank you for your thoughts. Can we? I'm going to pass the mic back one last time, so you can just plug yourself. Make sure
Well,
someone who's like who's watching this and thinking, I've got to go find the habit. Tell them how
yeah,
they can go find it.
yeah. You can find most of what I do at thehabit.co. And it's not .com. It's thehabit, as if it were all one word, .co. And there you can subscribe to my Tuesday letter. There's the Habit podcast. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts, and part of the Rabbit Room Podcast Network. And yeah, but the habit.co is a nice portal into everything. And then the Tuesday letter, I need to do this better, but I don't. But for now, let's just say subscribe. If you see the Tuesday letter, you'll see all my offerings as they come up. The next retreat, the next class, whatever. But what I need is, like everybody else, to have a website where you can find what you're looking for, upcoming events, whatever. Maybe we'll get there. It's not that hard from what I understand. But anyway, but most of everything is sort of funneled through that Tuesday letter.
That's great.
The Habit Weekly. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you, Jonathan. This has been so helpful.
I hope so.